Yeah, I learned this when I was working with Paul Favorites. He explains the analogy of buckets. You have buckets of certain things that you're doing. So if you have a bucket of basketball, bucket of weightlifting, a bucket of, let's just say plyometrics, you have three buckets. And so you have to emphasize which bucket means more to you. If the bucket of skill work is most important, then you have to emphasize that. If you have a bucket with weightlifting and you don't really prioritize that much, okay, great. But then you have the bucket of plyometrics.
You are listening to the Beyond the Scoreboard podcast, transforming athletes into leaders on and off the court with host Coach Furtado. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the first episode of a rebranded podcast from the Bridging Impact podcast to now the Beyond the Scoreboard podcast. I got Coach Ian with me today. Coach Ian is a basketball trainer who is blowing up in the South Bay of Los Angeles. Ian, welcome to the show.
But man, appreciate you having me, man. How you feeling?
I'm feeling good. Let's get right into it. Let's talk a little bit about before you get into training. So talking about your basketball experience as a player, how did the game of basketball have an impact on your life beyond the scoreboard?
Yeah, when I first started playing basketball, I was about maybe like 8 or 9. I just started playing. I didn't really take basketball super seriously, honestly, till about my senior year of high school. My junior year, I only averaged like 5 points a game. Wasn't taking it seriously. Then my senior year came through, and I realized my last year, make a little bit of an impact and maybe do something. And I went from averaging like 5 to about like 22 a game. So it's like a big jump. And all I did was just train my butt off that entire summer, man. And what I realized from that whole summer just training was like, if you really actually have something that you see inside of your head, you put the work in to do it, and then you keep just, making it a consistent effort. I feel like you can do anything that you want as long as it, is in some sort of genetic, kind of prowess
Right.
in that way. But then obviously through that experience, I learned a lot about training and myself. And so, putting myself through drills and putting myself through those things that, I kind of started to realize, like, okay, well, if this worked for me, what if I did this for other people? And so I ended up going to college, JUCO, played it for a little bit, and then, did well my first year, and then COVID hit, obviously, and that changed a lot. Caught it once or twice, protocols took me out, not even the whole COVID thing itself. And so that took me out the game for a bit. And during that process, I started to realize, like, I don't know if I want to do this full time. So I got into training. And I posted a couple of videos, and within, oh my God, probably like 2 to 3 months, I started gaining like 10,000 followers out of nowhere. So I was like, oh, okay, well, I'm getting something here. So let's see if we can, maybe take this full time. So ever since then, man, it's been taking it full time with content, training players through group sessions, and, trying to become humbly the number one trainer in the South Bay, to be quite honest with you.
Love it. Love it. Good stuff. Before we get into where you're at now, I do want to kind of talk about that summer of growth going from 5 points per game to 22 points per game. And you talked about training your butt off, and it's obviously hours in the gym. But I feel like there must have been some strategic work within how you were training. Was it mental training? Were you training in the weight room, on court, of course? Take us through that summer.
Yeah, vividly as I remember, it's funny. I don't remember a whole lot with it, but only because I didn't know the background between to be honest with you, like what exactly I was doing. Like
Right.
with what the knowledge that I know now compared to what I was in senior year high school,
Right.
myself now, even me not playing, would absolutely kill senior year, not even a question. But I think the reason why I was able to get there was for one, uh, I would consider myself like back in the day a shooter. I wasn't necessarily known as being super fluid, having crazy handles. I wouldn't pull it off in a game. Now, if you to play one on one off the court, like I can show you a little bit. But now my game is completely shifted, and because I focused a lot more on what I was seeing in game and what I was getting the opportunity with, so I did an absolute shit ton of shooting drills off the dribble, spot up. Can we cuss on this, by the way, or no?
Yeah, you're good.
Okay, my
You're
bad.
good.
Okay. But yeah, I did a whole lot of shooting drills, man. Do a whole lot off the ball stuff. But I didn't, really work on finishing all too much. I didn't really emphasize my handle, my fluidity, and the sports science aspect of everything. All I did was just I worked at a park. I was really cool with the district manager. He got me in all the time, so I just took advantage of it. So I was up in there probably honestly 6 or 7 days a week for 2 hours straight, night, morning, whatever the case may be, and I just literally was doing whatever I could. I didn't focus on the quality. I just put in the amount and the volume, and it showed. And then as I got older, I started to realize it's more about the quality over the quantity.
But I'm sure that experience and like that helped develop your work ethic to where you are today now as a basketball trainer to just put in that sheer work ethic and now that you're working smarter. So talking about working smarter, you're talking about the sports science behind things.
Mm.
And of course, right, there's people have to major in these, but like if you were going to give a quick crash course for the coaches that are listening when you're talking about building fluidity, mobility, and just more more fluid athletes, where would you start, or what pieces of information would you pass on to the coaches that are listening?
Yeah, it's a tough one because every coach comes from a different background. I came
Right,
from sports science, and so I always got into jumping, being agile, being quick, and all that type of stuff.
right,
Most coaches don't come from that background. So the first part is if you ever want to make your players more agile, more fluid, just have better movement quality in general. The number one thing is for one, just to learn it in general. So I think the best thing you can do is just watch film of certain NBA players. So as I started, I was watching a lot of players like Kyrie. Obviously, is a great one. You watch guys like Darius Garland. Maybe you watch some overseas guys, whoever the case that may you just think or look fluid or just move super fluidly, and then you would just simply kind of just study and just see how they move. So you would see Kyrie uses a lot of internal hip rotation when he's getting into certain moves. You can see that you're focusing on dribble stuff timing, so he's not taking one or two dribbles per dribble. He's taking more than, maybe three, four, maybe even five dribbles. I mean, 5 steps per dribble. So he knows how to float with the ball, knows how to hang with the ball. And I think a lot of coaches, they don't really emphasize that hanging, that nice fluidity that goes with it. Because if you kind of study between, for instance, like a great mover would be in like football. Football players like the most agile. They could sprint probably faster than NBA players. But the thing is that NBA players move so well for what they do is because they have a ball involved. If you grab a football player and told them, hey, you're going to do this type of movement with the ball, it would be janky, bro, because they're so worried about the ball. So I would emphasize coaches like instead of teaching a lot of stationary ball handling, let the ball handling come naturally. These kids, if they really suck with it, they okay, put them through some stuff, but emphasize the movement. The ball will naturally come, and ball handling, everything will naturally just come with it. But if you emphasize the movement, such as doing a turn dribble and floating with it as long as you can, stuff like that, just emphasizing the movement, and then the ball handling comes after. That's the process that I like to focus on. And then obviously, if you have a kid who's just naturally not very fluid, and it just takes a little bit more just to kind of get them to get into that, that motive and that mood, I would start to emphasize just without the ball, just literally get them in these positions. So a lot of times when we go with our band warms in the very beginning, the shiftiness from side to side, like going inside and outside, when getting into hip internal rotation, activating the glutes, and relying less on the quads and more on the glutes itself. A great exercise you can do is just simply, having your right hand, touching your left foot, just going back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, and just really emphasizing full glute engagement. And that's the number one issue too, is that a lot of players are so quad and calf dominant. They don't focus on the posterior, like the hamstrings. They're not really emphasizing enough of the glutes, the glute medius, the maximus, all that type of stuff. And so a lot of that goes into just absorbing force when you're getting into certain moves, getting the having the ability to get out. So there's a lot that's involved. And I think the more you focus on if you're a coach, the little tiny nuances and the aspects and just studying and just learning from other people, you slowly build up a player by just doing that. But you need to be able to have both perspectives of the performance and how they move, and then adding the ball and just letting it come natural.
No, I love it, and I want to continue to kind of dive down to like the performance aspect of it because you're talking about absorbing force and posterior gluten hamstring, right? Instead of being like super quad and calf dominant. I feel
Yeah.
like that's a big reason there's a lot of like overuse injuries.
Mhm.
So could you kind of continue to expand on different ways that we can build like more mobile athletes? Because I feel like athletes are training quite a bit nowadays, but they are not probably doing enough mobility work.
Yeah, I learned this when I was working with Paul Favorites. He explains the analogy of buckets. Where you have buckets of certain things that you're doing. So if you have a bucket of basketball, a bucket of weightlifting, a bucket of, let's just say plyometrics, you have 3 buckets. And so you have to emphasize which bucket means more to you. If the bucket of skill work is most important, then you have to emphasize that. If you have a bucket with weightlifting and you don't really prioritize that much, okay, great. But then you have the bucket of plyometrics, that's a whole other category. So now you have all these factors here that, kind of basically mess each other with their advancement towards getting better at all 3 of those things. So let's just say you want to be a better, at skill. So if you emphasize skill, that's the number one thing you want to get better at. And then you have these other 2 buckets of plyos and weightlifting. You have to either, for one, up the skill super high and get rid of a whole other bucket, or emphasize the skill but go less, way less than the other 2. And so I think what I think what some coaches don't understand is that these players, the basketball bucket of them of doing skill work and playing is like literally beyond full. And then you have the weightlifting bucket, and then you have the
Right.
plyos bucket. So the
Right.
thing is now is that people for coaches who don't understand plyometrics in the sports science, there's low level plyometrics and high level and why am I forgetting the term for this? Extensive plyometrics and high intensity plyometrics. High intensity is jumping, dunking, getting up as high as you can, crazy layup, whatever the case may be. Low level is just jogging, jump roping in the sense, very low level stuff. You get all the low level stuff through playing basketball. So you really don't need to be training the low level stuff unless you're trying to train, a tendon resiliency, adaptation, be more bouncy off the ground, stuff like that. Maybe just kind of like general maintenance work. And then you have the high intensity stuff. So a lot of times you'll get into a weight room session, and let's just say you guys are doing hurdle jumps or you guys are doing, depth drops. All that's great. I think now what you do is instead of having all of it be separate, if you're in a skills training session, you do your skill work, and let's say you want to work on finishing, but after you have a weightlifting session, it's going to tax you just as much. Instead of you going separately into that weight session and doing more plyometrics, instead just be on the court while you're there. Then after you get done with your skill work, maybe add in like 4 or 5, maybe maximum of 10 jumps. That would be as high intensity as you possibly can with the ball, so you build the skill of jumping. And you work on certain layups, you work on certain dunks, whatever the case may be. But the number one thing is that you're just bounding that into skill work. So now you basically remove all of the other stresses you'd be having for those plyometrics after your skill session directly into your skill session. So now you're good. Less intensity, it's all added into that. Now you're weightlifting. So you just got done with an hour and a half skills training. Now let's just say you're going to the weightlifting. Now you're going to do some crazy ass, compound exercises. Now you're doing a deadlift. Now you're doing maybe some back squats, hack squat, whatever the case may be. It's going to be super taxing. Now you have to understand, okay, well, does this matter as much compared to if I was doing my skills training? So now, in order to make this a little bit better, maybe instead of doing 3 to 4 sets of that, you do maybe 1 to 2 sets, heavyweight, 4 to 5 reps. Just make the adaptation stay there. Have that maintenance of that. Now, obviously, when you're going into there now, the thing is, when you're playing basketball, you're using a lot of quads, calf. You're neglecting the feet quite a bit, but it's mainly a quad. It's mainly a calf dominant sort of, sport. Now, when you get in the weight room, instead of focusing so much on the quad and calves, now maybe start to focus on maybe slow calf raises where you target the soleus. Maybe you do some RDLs that focus on maybe internal hip rotation and getting the hamstrings involved. Maybe you do, don't do clamshell, don't do the booty band shit. Maybe you're doing like, a Copenhagen hold where you're focusing on the groin, like stuff like that, to where you wouldn't target within skills training. So basically, skills training is number one. That comes first over anything else. Whatever you did not do or target in skills training, you do in weightlifting or you do somewhere else. So that's kind of how I've learned from other guys like Paul Fabritz and how I've kind of approached my own players and whatnot and my own self personally as well. And I think it works the best because it's less intensity, less volume, and it's kind of like the bang for your buck. You knock out 2 birds with one stone sort of thing.
Right, and you're working smarter, and there's only so much time in a day, right? So if
Yeah.
you were going to go back and tell yourself in that summer, right, how to work smarter and harder, right,
Mhm.
you would have maybe even been able to get even more results, right?
Yeah.
Just from training smarter. So like
Yeah.
that's definitely I feel like a big shift
Yeah.
in where the training world is going.
Yeah, yeah, totally. And it's funny when I was in high school, I don't really remember lifting a whole lot. I think literally what I did was like maybe certain compound movements, but I didn't do all the accessory movements or anything like calf raises or RDLs or nothing like that. I remember just jumping a whole lot because I had a lower ring in my front yard, and then I would just throw up lobs all the time, just trying to dunk.
Yep.
So if you're a kid also who's trying to dunk, I mean, prioritize the jumping and everything like that. You can get stronger later on. So that's another thing as well.
Gotcha. Cool. That's good to know. So, kind of talking about and bridging from the performance side of things, I want to talk about how if someone comes to you, right, when an athlete enters your program or where they want to work with you, how do you kind of meet them where they're at? Kind of see where they're at on court skill wise, and then also kind of their movement patterns, and how do you kind of prescribe to them as you know, a sports performance quote unquote doctor in terms of what they need to do to improve?
Yeah, it's different depending upon the session type. If it's semi-private, then I can do a lot more with them because they're paying a higher rate and then they're with me privately. If it's a group session, it's a little bit different. They kind of just
Right.
have to do whatever the theme of the session is.
Right.
I'm not going to
Right.
stop the whole session just because of you, sort of thing. But that's
Right.
not even a bad thing though, because eventually then they'll just catch up and they'll be able to get there. The motivation of them want to be in with the pack and with the group and whatnot, be on the same level, that drives them. But let's just say hypothetically, like it's a semi-private session. I have a kid, he's a younger kid. He's kind of in that boat where he's not super just naturally genetic, freak. Is not super mobile, not super fluid with his movement. So usually what we do is that, like I've said before, like I'll isolate a certain movement. So like today, or actually, sorry, it was last week. He struggles a lot with just like being able to just get quick off the ground. So we'll do a lot of twitchy stuff. You've seen that with like certain trainers like Paul Faber. It's like the twitch code sort of thing. But what emphasizes a lot of like completely relaxing and just completely 100% go sort of thing. I think that helps with just kind of like regulating the nervous system, adapting the nervous system, what the sport demands and whatnot. So doing a lot of that stuff where it's just like a lot of slow to just quick immediately. A lot of smoother movements, so working on maybe certain shuffle patterns, maybe working on just the movement itself, and adding a ball later on. And then obviously as well, I think a big one is doing some sort of fluid drill. So if it's, for instance, working on some sort of shuffle pattern, working on the skill of that shuffle pattern, and then having a certain segment where you do that shuffle pattern and directly go into a one-on-one. So now what you're doing is like you're training that movement, but then they know exactly how to read and react off of that and play instinctually with their own game. So I think being able to like combine the one-on-one aspect and then also the fluidity aspect is actually super important, because these players, like, they just, if you do a drill for so long, they just think, okay, I'm going to do this, this, and that, and then do this. And then that's all they think of, because it's just all just one dimensional. But then if you just do the movement and then you introduce this whole new segment where it's like, oh shit, I'm going one on one. Like, I don't know what to do now. Okay, let's just figure it out. Now everything we've worked on previously now comes into the one on one. So now you transfer all that fluid movement and the read and react, and everything into that drill. So I think that's another important one. Just going fluidly, like with a drill, and then directly into a one on one directly after.
100%. And so like let's go right there with the 1v1s because we do a lot of it in our trainings as well.
Yeah.
So kind of, share your kind of why you started doing a lot more 1v1s in your trainings and the results that you're seeing with it.
Yeah, it's because it's funny. There's a couple. I'm not gonna name any trainers, but there's a couple trainers who don't like the 1v1 and like small sided game stuff, because they say players play too much already, and you need individual skill work. And like I get that perspective. I get that argument for sure. But it's like, it's not like we're doing it for the entire hour or hour and a half. Like, we're not doing straight one-on-ones the entire time. So it's like, I
Right.
agree. The first like 40 minutes, 45 should be individual skill work in a group session. It should definitely be working on skill, because the players, they are playing a lot. They're playing AAU all the time. And then when you have practice, they're just practicing. They're not really working on the game. And then like when you go to the games, depending upon what type of player or how good you are, if you're one of the main guys, you're gonna get the ball a lot. You're gonna have a lot of play time. But if you're like a kid who doesn't get a whole lot of play time, you're not that great. You're not gonna see the court all that much. So like you're just gonna stand in the corner and just run up and down. You're just getting cardio. So my thing is now like a lot of players, they'll work super hard and they do other things, but the thing is they just can't translate into the game. So now the importance of playing out a certain situation and going one on one is, like, in my opinion, vital. I think you have to have it in order to see the best results. And then in terms of the results that I've seen, like every player that I've came across does not. I've yet to hear a single player come across to me and be like, "Oh, I hate what we're doing." If
Right.
there's a single player that comes through it and says, "I hate playing 1v1 basketball," it's because, one, you suck and you just don't want to, kind of like expose yourself. But then two, every player like loves to play. So like imagine now you have skill work. They know they're gonna get the skill work, and then you introduce the skill itself, and then into a one-on-one, they start seeing the results. For one, the confidence boosts up. So now they're like, "Ooh, I feel like a 1v1 god," or whatever the case may be. So now they feel super just jacked, super confident. Now when they get into the game, they're like, "Oh, I've done this before. This is cake. I do this all the time in training. I do way worse in training. I fail and airball and do all this crazy, stupid stuff in training. By the time we get to the game, it's way more condensed, and like I feel so much more organized and better." So that's the number one thing I get, is that I fail a lot in training doing it, but then by the time we get into the game, I feel so much more crisp. So I think it's vital. I don't see the debate in it, to be quite honest with you.
No, I'm 100% with you because you can develop skill through one-on-ones though. Just like
Yeah,
how you design the one-on-ones, like you constrain them to a certain space, certain time, right? But like we're talking about, you're gonna fail more in that sort of training versus like if you're training on air, right?
yeah,
Which is sometimes it's good to develop a certain technique, and
mhm,
if there's a repetitive pattern, obviously to address, but I feel like it's more engaging, right? Basketball's a 5-on-5 game. It
yeah,
requires decision making. It requires, you being able to respond after a miss, right? Like a
yeah.
failed rep. So creating that as an environment as a trainer is vital.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think the fastest way for a player who's not good right now to get super good at basketball is to grab a friend and do focus on some sort of skill. Like let's say it's a certain push cross variation, something like that. They want to focus on skill. You do a push cross for 30, 45 minutes. You grab your partner, you push cross and go one-on-one off of it. You do that for any other skill. If you struggle with speed stops, if you struggle with, you know, corner drifts, if you struggle with transition, you work on the skill of that and then you add a partner and you go 1v1 off it. I promise you that I think that is the fastest way to get better. I'm not saying you're going to do it in 3 weeks, but compared to just the generalized training, it's probably the most efficient and fastest way to get better for anybody listening and whatnot.
Yeah, it is. It's called it's accelerated learning. I was
Yeah,
actually listening to a podcast about it today,
yeah,
literally specifically on what we're talking about,
yeah,
because you're going to learn what's the best way we learn through in life. Like for us as business owners, we learn through our failures, right?
yeah.
Whether it's on the basketball court or not.
Mhm.
So like, if I speed stop here on my left and they cut me off to my right, I don't even. Then I have to figure out. My body's going to have to figure out. Okay, I need to move a little bit more to the left or to the
Yeah.
right.
Yeah, and that's another thing too. Everybody moves and everybody plays so much different. That's why like everybody has their own style and smoothness. So it's like some people don't do very well moving laterally. So like instead of just doing a bunch of lateral moves, maybe they just do one big power lateral move. Or like they're not very good at decelerating. So instead of fully stopping, maybe they're really good at countering and just sliding right off of you. Like everybody moves differently. So it's like that's a good point as well. It's like everybody has their own style and their own movement patterns and whatnot.
Right, and you have to have your own movement patterns against different defenders too,
Yeah.
right? You're going to attack a 6'3", 200-pound wing different than a
Yep.
5'6", 120-pound guard.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
just learning how to attack different defenders is a skill in itself.
Yeah, I got a 6'5" college guy that he's usually in my group sessions, but me and him train as well. Like we go 1-on-1 against each other, stuff like that all the time. We train, and I know his game, so I'll always cut him off. But the thing is that the way that he moves, instead of him just going straight to a counter, because he's a lot taller, a lot lengthier, instead of him just going straight to a counter, he'll actually just kind of drop the ball, post up, and then he'll decide to go after that. So instead of just boom stopping, he'll stop fully,
Right.
maybe do like a little bit of a post up, and then decide to counter, do something else. And that's just his movement pattern. I've yet to see him do something super quick, and when he does it, he's kind of out of control. So everybody has their own style when it comes to that type of stuff.
Exactly, right? And I feel like you don't have to have a ton of different counters, right? If you look
Mhm.
at someone like Reed Shepard, who's just like super just masters playing at his pace and getting to his
Yeah.
spots, right? So every player is going to, part of, I guess, being a trainer is helping athletes explore and figure out what their scoring spot is or what their, strengths are and how they can bring more impact to a team.
Yeah, and like John Morant is another example. He's not like very he's not a super shifty guard, but he's super good going downhill, and he has a bunch
Right,
of counters going downhill. So it's trippy. And Curry's the same way. Not a super shifty guard, but he has great movement going laterally and forward
right.
and linearly. But he's not a super shifty guy. But he excels in what he excels in.
Right, and he's such a good shooter that they
Yeah.
have to respect. They have to come out so far, and so that
Yep.
gives him so much space, so much more space to work with.
Yeah.
Good stuff. All right, so talking a little bit more, kind of for some of the trainers and coaches that maybe want to start their own business or start their own training or even just grow whatever kind of company they're part of. Can you talk to us a little bit on, obviously you've blown up on social media, you're getting a lot more attention in terms of in the South Bay area of players wanting to train with you. Can you talk us through kind of the business process of how you've grown?
Yeah. So when I first started, I didn't have a I didn't have obviously a pro experience and a great college experience, so I couldn't use that to my resume. So what I had to do was simply just, learn from some of the best of the best. I had to go to seminars. I had to maybe work for certain people. For anybody first starting out, you're gonna have to go free for like the first, like, I don't know, maybe 6 to 7 months, to be quite honest with you, like the first session free sort of thing. You just literally have to build your credibility. But the way in which I was to kind of like be able to like not bypass that completely, but do it in a shorter time was that the content for me was honestly number one. But it wasn't just generalized content that you see everywhere. See, like the thing is that like basketball training, people say it's saturated. I think it's still a very small niche community, and I think it's not emphasized enough. And I think because of the community that it is and the history that it has, everything's treated as like it's a side hustle. Nothing is not treated like an actual business. There's no like crazy marketing involved. There's no crazy campaigns being thrown out. There's no actual delegation going on within different employees and whatnot. And I think when you have that mindset of like, oh, this is a side hustle, it shows. Like, it literally shows. And so you won't get your times right. You won't get like your certain days right. You won't have a certain, client onboarding process. Like, you're not going to be able to funnel people from your social media into your training, stuff like that. Like, that all matters. And when I think when you start to emphasize more of the back end for trainers who are out there, like, the training part's easy, dude. You've been doing that for so long. That's not an issue
Right.
at all. You can show up with no preparation, be able to get it done. The hardest part is the back end stuff. The hardest part is like dedicating time to like doing, cold outreach to certain players, finding certain Instagram profiles and messaging them and giving them, an invitation. It's connecting with coaches, it's connecting with other players, and setting up like, referral processes. It's like, hey, if you refer a player, you get 10% off. And that's obviously, the incentive to go out and refer somebody. Like, little tiny marketing techniques and sales techniques. And I think it goes a lot to that, but to get the point across, the content helped me out the most because that helped me build my credibility because I didn't have the pro experience or the college experience. And so, if you're going to be getting into this, emphasize the content. And the only reason I say that is because you get your name out there and do something that other trainers aren't doing. So, like, in South Bay, there's not a whole lot of hybrid guys, but also too, there's not a lot of trainers in general in the South Bay who are putting out like a lot of content. Like, I try to put out at least 2 a day. So if you do that per month, it's like 60 pieces of content per month. I try to like get it out there. And so that's my advertising, that's my marketing, that's my credibility. So you find a way to stand out in some sort of way. And I think you can develop a solid company as long as you treat it like one.
Yeah, so I mean, what I hear is obviously the training, right? If you want to grow your own business, you have to become and learn the skills of being a business owner, right?
Yeah.
Otherwise, it's just a side hustle. It's your after hours job, whatever you
Yeah.
want to call it. Talking about kind of client onboarding process, the whole experience that goes with it. When you're talking about building content, because I know you're building a media business on the side, you put out like a sheer volume. Can you talk about what that content creating journey has been like for you?
Yeah. So when I first started, it was me as a 20-year-old going to 24 and training myself and then just recording the drills that I was doing. So it was god awful content. It was like me trying to give some sort of hook that took like a minute straight before I got into it. So like nobody would ever watch, or people would watch, but like they only watched because it was cringe. And so then the first couple months I had to learn from that. I'm like, okay, well, I got to make these videos shorter. So then I made them like 30 seconds long, still the same thing. And then like now a year later, like I've completely switched now. So it's like before going on the phone, now I have a video guy that I'm blessed to have. And so now he records everything in a good quality. And now I switch up my content style. So like sometimes it's no audio, where it's like not talking over it at all. Then maybe it's a teaching point. Then maybe it's just a highlight from the workout. I do different types of strategies, and so maybe I'll do like some widespread content where it's like it just shows an ankle breaker or like a dunk, so people just get eyes. Then they check out my content, like, oh, this guy's a trainer. Oh, he's putting out good information. So there's different techniques that I'll use, but I had to learn a lot of it through just like watching podcasts or just learning from certain people. When I would make the long drives, I used to intern for J Law and I used to intern for Paul. Those are all hour plus drives for me. So during that hour, I would always listen to certain podcasts and like business stuff or like content stuff and like having to do with like the psychology of like selling, the psychology of like, putting out content, the psychology of getting people's attention. And after a while, once you just start to like maximize every hour of the day towards learning something new and not wasting any idle time, that's when you find it. I think there's always there's always an extra gear. I think a lot of people, if you relate this to training, it's like an analogy in a sense and like in comparison, you work on certain things in training, such as like, shooting, such as ball handling, such as finishing, because the certain drills that you do and the certain tactics that you do are going to give you the ROI for damn sure. You have to do the exact same thing when it comes to this stuff. You don't just do a bunch of random stuff to just see if you get something in return. You know what's going to work. So, for instance, for me, what works best is cold outreach content and a certain onboarding process to get social media guys to my thing. Those are the three topping things. So that's like my finishing, my shooting, my ball handling. So I work on those three. I don't waste any time on anything else on the list. I don't have to. So I guess it really comes down to like you have to be psychotic. You have to be obsessive about it. To be quite honest with you, like it sounds weird. I hate to say it like that, but it's the only explanation that I have. The only description I have for it. You literally kind of have to think about it all day long. You have to kind of distance yourself from certain things that are going to be taking time away from you. If you have friends that are getting in the way, you have to distance yourself. If you go out on weekends, or you drink, you do certain things, you have to stop doing that to a certain degree. It just depends how bad you want it. And for me, like I know I'm only 21, but it's like I want it. Like I want to be able to have a life where it's like I don't have to worry about certain things, and I can just have an onboarding process where I don't have to worry about a damn thing. Money comes through every month, comes through every week, and I value that a lot more than just a temporary experience on the weekend. So I guess that's kind of like where my mindset is at.
I love it.
Yeah,
And I feel like for your story in terms of just you're a worker, right? Just that sheer effort and like
yeah,
just outwork you. I'm
had
gonna
to.
outlearn you,
Yeah.
and I just it shows in your work. It shows in how much you've grown, right?
Mhm.
And so my last kind of thing will be is like before you blew up that first, 5, 6, 7 months when you were training people for free, how did you, stay consistent when you were going on those hour-long drives? Because I'm sure there are at times where you're like, oh, like
Mhm.
why am I doing this? I could go get some cushy job or
Yeah,
whatever your thought process was.
yeah. With me, I have I do a very good job, and I'm not trying to boast myself, but I know I do a very good job at just being able to see a vision, and if I see it, I know I'm going to get it. I don't know what it is. I just if I can see it in my head, I just know after time, if I keep doing this at a certain extent and a certain consistency, I know I'm going to get it. There's no question about it. If I, you know, and I know especially too because I'm an only child. I've always grown up an only child and whatnot, and so like I always had idle time on my hands. And throughout my entire life, like even like when I used to walk into gyms and go and train and go into certain leagues, like I was always looked down upon because I was like the white kid who was a little bit shorter, and so people would automatically like, oh, okay, target him. So I always use that as a chip on my shoulder. So now anytime I walk into the gym, even to this day, I want to walk in and I want to be like top five most athletic guy in there. I want to be top three most skilled dude, and I want to be like looked at as like, oh, okay, I know that guy. I've seen him before. I want to do the exact, and I did that from the minute I started playing in my senior year all the way to where I stopped playing, and I ended up achieving that. Now I want to do the exact same thing when it comes into basketball training. Like anytime I walk into the gym, and I don't even mean it to be more so like cocky or like have an ego. Anytime I walk into the gym, I want people to know that okay, I know that guy. He's a trainer, or that guy's legit. Like I like his stuff, or I've seen his content. Like I think he's a really good trainer. I want to think the exact same thing, and that's a little bit of my ego, and that's a little bit of my, confidence kind of getting in because it's just like I've always had that mindset the minute I was going into sports that I had the exact same thing going into this business in a sense. So it's almost a little bit having a little bit of a kind of like distortion between like who you think you are and what you can really be. And if you really think you're that guy, you'll know it. And so I'm not going to tell you to just, go into the mirror and just say, you're that guy, you're that guy. But when you've put in a certain amount of work, dude, and you've like seen a lot of results, after a while, you don't need to yell it into the air. You just know like, I'm that guy or I'm going to be one of those guys. So yeah.
I love it. No, I love it, and I'm 100% on board with you. And so, kind of, my last question will be for you is how do you instill this mindset that you have into your athletes that you work with?
Oh my God, bro! You can talk to any one of my athletes. Every single one of them that I have a personal relationship with. I think it's the number one thing for coaches. If you have a personal relationship with if you have 40 to 50 clients, bro, like if you have 20 in a group, 30 in a group, text every single one of them after the group and say, "Hey, good work today, dude." Da 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 da. What I always do after my groups, and I have footage of this, and for people who think I'm bullshit, you can go on my IG and check it out. I have group workouts that I always host, and so at the very end, I gather everybody up. I'll ask them, "What you good with today? What you struggle with today?" Everybody says their answer and whatnot. I'll give a little bit of some advice. Whoever's in the crowd, whoever's a college guy, maybe whoever's a high level guy, I'll ask them and say it out loud, like, "Hey, for all these guys want to, to get to the next level, yada yada yada." Give them a little bit of some advice. They'll give me some advice, and then I'll give my advice, and then we go from there. I think the more that you do that type of stuff, and then you actually have a personal connection with every single one of your players, and you try to give them the mindset that you have in your brain. If you try to tell them like, "Hey, go home, watch this move, watch that player, think this way, go and do it on the court." The more you try to instill your mindset in your players, fuck, like they will become some really good players. And so the one thing I'll always do is for the ones who especially really want it, or like kind of psychotic and obsessed about it, I'll refer them to a YouTube channel called Intuition Hoops. I'll tell them go to this channel. There's full raw edited highlights of NBA players' highlights. Just study everything that you see, your favorite player, and then go out and do it. And so I've had a lot of players say, "Man, I learned a lot. Like I'm doing this now, I'm doing that now." And yeah, so that's a key one. Like just having a personal relationship with all your players because that builds the credibility and the trust. You keep them longer term as a client, and also too, you'll see a lot better results.
We have a lot of similar philosophies in how we
Yeah.
run our training sessions. So
Yeah.
I really appreciate you taking time out of your busy schedule. I know you're blowing up.
No,
Super
I appreciate
excited.
I
Glad.
appreciate you inviting me, man. You got a good thing going as well, man, with this podcast and your training. So I wish nothing but the best for you as well. And you keep killing it on the business side and also the training side, man.
I appreciate you. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Beyond the Scoreboard podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure that you subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts and share it with a friend, coach, or parent you feel like would get value from this episode. It's our responsibility to impact as many parents and coaches who are the ones that are impacting our athletes. That's how we create a ripple effect. So, thank you for being a part of our community, and we look forward to serving you all next week.